Hi, I'm Matt Ambrose with the Defense Acquisition University. For the next 10 minutes, I'm going to give you an overview on material solution analysis. That's the first phase of the 5 phases of the defense acquisition system. Recall that material solution analysis, the purpose there is to pick the most promising technology to meet a user need that's stated in that initial capabilities document. So let's dig in just a little bit. To enter this phase at the material development decision, you need that approved initial capabilities document I just talked about, study guidance for your analysis of alternatives, and a plan to conduct the AOA. And that's kind of true of any place that we get a decision from our milestone decision authority. We need a plan for the next thing that we're going to do. In this case, an analysis of alternatives is really one of the big things that we're executing in material solution analysis, because that's the point. We want to pick the best technology out of all the alternatives in order to meet that user need. In addition to that, we need to establish a program manager and a program management office, and also put together our initial program documentation, including the acquisition strategy, test and evaluation master plan, and the others that are listed here. During this phase also, we are going to be interfacing with the warfighters who wrote this initial capabilities document in the JSID system to get a draft capability development document. So there's going to be a lot of dialogue back and forth to make that happen. Also, we need to establish full funding in the Future Years Defense Program during this phase, so our financial management folks will be pretty busy. Now I'm going to break this down by functional area, and we'll look at what each functional area within acquisition needs to do in order to make this phase successful. And really what we're pushing at here is to get all the data we need to make the right decisions in order to come to milestone A with confidence that we can execute technology maturation and risk reduction, which is the next phase. That's kind of the way it works. In each phase we're working toward a decision, a good confident decision, that we're ready for the next phase. The program management folks have to establish staffing of that PMO. That's really the first thing, because you're not going to get anything done without a staff and without a team. We're really looking for a good team of experts here from each of the functional areas that we're going to talk about, because you'll see there are some major things happening in each of those functional areas, and if you don't have someone that knows what they're doing, it might be kind of difficult to put a decent program together here at the very beginning. First, we're also going to analyze our program risk and plan mitigation. This is one of the early activities that is then going to follow us all the way through the acquisition framework. We're going to go through that cycle of risk management where we identify the risks, then we figure out how we're going to mitigate them, and then we go ahead and put that mitigation in place. Then we analyze the risks again. We're just going to keep doing that. We also have to oversee that analysis of alternatives. That's not done in the program office, but we certainly have to interface with the folks that are doing that and make sure that we provide our input as that's happening. We have to form a tailored acquisition strategy. Tailored is key here. What I'm showing you is just kind of the generic process. Every program is different, so you have to tailor your acquisition strategy to the particular challenges of the need that you're delivering to the warfighter. You also need to establish your should cost goals in this particular phase, because you're expected to take the initial cost estimate for the program and then identify specific ways to come in underneath that so that we can identify cost savings and use those cost savings to provide more capability to the warfighter, either within our program or within another program possibly. Our contracting folks have lots to do. They need to get some contractors on board to support the PMO. They also need to take a look at contractors for any studies and possibly even working with the analysis of alternatives. So those contracts need to be done. They also need to start planning for the next phase, because that's going to be very challenging from a contracting standpoint. We're not going to be able to release a request for proposals until milestone A for the next phase. However, we can certainly release draft RFPs or requests for information in order to get some feedback back from industry and figure out what the best way is to go about setting up for the competitive prototyping we're going to do in the next phase. We also need to manage the contract performance of the contracts that are put in place during this phase and make sure that we get out of those contracts what we're supposed to and close them out in a timely manner. Our financial managers have to fund all of this. So they have to establish the initial program cost estimates that the funding is going to be based on, and then put in the P&R forms that we put in to get our money. We also need to analyze the affordability of the different analysis of alternatives and assist in that should cost analysis that the program manager is doing. That certainly helps if we have some good cost estimation folks to tell us where we might be able to save some money and where we can be confident that our cost estimates are good. They also need to manage the funds execution, whatever funds we are using for this particular phase, which tend to kind of come out of HIDE. We need to make sure that we are obligating and executing those according to our plan. Let's switch gears now and talk about some of the technical aspects of the program. And at the top, we're going to talk about systems engineering and how they help us get through material solution analysis and get the data to have confidence in a good milestone A decision going forward. First of all, we've got to analyze the requirements. Systems engineering is a problem-solving process. And the first step in any problem-solving process is understanding what the problem is, and that's what the requirements analysis is all about. We need to have a good mutual understanding between us and the warfighter that wrote the requirement, what that requirement really means so that we're going to satisfy it. We also need to plan the technical activities for the next phase. How are we going to do that competitive prototyping? How are we going to assess it? All of that comes together in a systems engineering plan, so your first systems engineering plan is due at milestone A, must be approved by then. Also, we're going to analyze the technical risks, help the program manager with the technical side of risk management, and plan for mitigation of those risks as well. We want to establish our initial system models and simulations, which will help us with both design and test. And we should have some good feedback from the testing that we actually do to provide data for these models and make them better as we go through the program. Speaking of test and evaluation, just because we don't necessarily have hardware at this point doesn't mean that our T&E folks don't have work to do. They also need to analyze the requirements and make sure that they're measurable and testable. They need to establish an initial test and evaluation master plan. That's one of those program documents that's due at milestone A. So you've got to have your initial temp approved at milestone A. They're going to integrate modeling and simulation into that test and evaluation master plan. That can really help save us money, but we've got to have the right balance of tests where we get real data that we can then make the models and simulations better, and then the models and simulations might tell us where we can test for weaknesses and that kind of thing. We also want to plan the technical demonstrations and testing that we're going to do in the next phase. Certainly if we're doing competitive prototyping in the next phase, we want to plan how we're going to tell how that's going and how we've matured the technology. Kind of hard to do that without testing it to see how it does. Software development needs to start early as well. We need to especially consider program protection planning. That program protection plan is due at milestone A like some of our other program documentation. We can also validate models for the analysis of alternatives here, and we can evaluate the software implications of each of the alternatives, because some things require more challenging software approaches and some things might be easier to handle from a software standpoint. So we need to understand that within the program. We also need our software folks to take a look at software-specific risks and where we might be able to mitigate some of those. As part of this program protection plan, what we're really looking at is cybersecurity. Are we protecting our program from attacks through information technology? Production quality and manufacturing also needs to get busy here in material solution analysis. They can look at the producibility of each of the alternatives, and once we pick an alternative out of that analysis of alternatives, then we can take a look at what's the producibility challenge or risk in that particular alternative that we're taking forward. And we can also use that to plan our initial production strategy, to look at materials, look at methods, those kinds of things, to make sure that there's nothing there that's going to stop us when we eventually get to designing for production. Then we need to analyze the manufacturing risks and plan mitigation, just like we do in the other functional areas, to help our program manager with the overall risk management on the program. Last but certainly not least, our lifecycle logistics folks need to take a look at supportability. And they need to look at each of these alternatives, and then once we choose one, we can do some more detailed planning as to what the support concept is going to look like. So we want to plan that support strategy and come up with our initial lifecycle sustainment plan, or LCSP. We also want to conduct a business case analysis as part of putting that lifecycle sustainment plan together. This takes a look at the affordability of what we're doing and making sure we're really getting what we're paying for in terms of supportability, and that we've got a good, no kidding business strategy on how to go about that. We also want to analyze sustainment risks, just like in the other lanes, and plan for mitigation there, helping the program manager with the overall risk management process on the program. So you see how all of these different lanes in a program work together and have to integrate in order to make this work. You can imagine none of this happens without money. Very little of it is probably going to happen without some support in different areas in terms of the technical analysis, the contracts, etc. All of that has to come together throughout the life of the program, and it starts here. So material solution analysis, again, kicks off the overall defense acquisition system. You'll get an opportunity to see the other phases in other videos, and I do encourage you to take advantage of that. Also take advantage of the online resources that we have, including the Defense Acquisition Guidebook, which provides a lot of good how-tos with all of the documentation and the processes that we use in acquisition. Thanks for listening.